Well, welcome back to Bull City Coordinators. This is Ben, and I've got another guest going back to the late 90s era of Duke football. This is more for the older fans out there, but for the younger folks, I hope you enjoy this interview. I think it's going to be a very good one. We have a wonderful guest who was a star linebacker at Duke, wore number 45, along with Ryan Stallmeyer, who wore number 44. Made an outstanding linebacker core. We have Todd DeLamielleure. Thank you, Todd, for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Thanks for doing this. Shoot, it's cool to think back to those days. At least some of it is.
Well, we'll get into that here soon enough. But like I told you, when I was doing my research for this, I was reminded that you were a firefighter in Charleston, South Carolina, in 2007, when one of the worst fires in certainly South Carolina history and in the country's history as far as the loss of life for firefighters since 9/11, the Charleston Sofa Superstore fire, which took the lives, I believe, of 9 people, another 18 or so injured. What was that like for you as far as the aftermath of that fire and just trying to deal with the loss of life and injuries to friends and coworkers?
It was just, it was really surreal. Like, it was like this, when you think of, like, I remember going, so when I first got in the fire department, I went with my wife, because it was kind of out of nowhere. Now, my grandpa on my mom's side was a fire chief, so I had that, but I never really thought, maybe I'd be a fireman. But then when football kind of didn't really work out, I'm like, man, I could not do the corporate thing. And I remember going to see the movie Ladder 49 with my wife, and she was my fiance at the time. And we came out, and she was crying like, well, this is scary. And I remember being like, Mindy, with the safety things we do, something like this it wouldn't happen. It's very, very unlikely it would happen. And I always think of that once that happened, I was like, man, I can't, you're just in disbelief. And then just picking up from there, a lot of times you're kind of like, man, it so easily could have been me, because it was all, we were trained a certain way. We would have done the same tactics. Didn't matter who was there. We were kind of interchangeable parts when it came to how we would have tactically fought that fire. And it was all wrong, to be honest with you, in hindsight. But at the time, you had a lot of survivor guilt for a while. We were like, man, why wasn't I there? Why wasn't I on shift, or, whatever. So, that's a difficult thing to deal with. And then after that, we dealt with an awful lot of change in the department, and it was all difficult. They still struggle with it. And to be honest, I left the department, probably 6-7 years after the Sofa Superstore, and I would say there's maybe 10% of the fire department left that was there previous to the fire, because it was just all the change, and it was really difficult to deal with. It's just.
You mentioned that you talked about survivor's guilt, but you were off duty that night, weren't you?
I was off duty, and I ended up, it was kind of like it was a little bit before like cell phones were you're getting real-time information, where, I had a buddy call me out of an old flip phone that was on duty, like, hey, we got a fire at the Sofa Superstore. It's going to be pretty bad, it looks like. And I kind of was like, okay, kind of trying to pay attention to it. And then once you learned how bad it was, and everybody was going there, I ended up going down to my station downtown, because they were the only station that stayed on the peninsula, 2 engines that stayed on the peninsula. And really, when I think back of it, what's really difficult is, you don't think about it, but like when 9/11 happened, somebody backfilled those stations, and you tried to respond to other calls. So once we knew it was bad and there were guys missing, you were on duty still, and you still had to respond to calls. So I went down to my station and ran a couple calls with them and tried to help out where they were undermanned. But, it's, when I think back to it, it was just a crazy time, where the whole time you're going, I don't know if this is even real. It was just awful, because it was a small department too. Charleston's a little bigger city now, but you go back 20, now that's that's almost 15 years ago.
That was before the big bridge they redid the bridge, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a small city, and I knew everybody. Every single one of those guys I had worked with at least a little bit, and was friendly with, was friends with a few of them, where I would hang out with them. So it wasn't like losing an acquaintance. It was losing a friend. It was difficult.
Now, I had read that you tried, correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory is that store was in West Ashley. Is that right?
Yes.
And that on a good day is a traffic nightmare. I remember. Yeah. I mean, my maternal grandparents used to live out that way, but that you actually tried to get out there, but the interstate was blocked down.
Well, I didn't. I ended up calling, so I called back down to the station. I'm like, I'm going to head down there, and the captain that was there was like, you know what, come here. You're not going to do any good there. You're going to have a hard time even getting over the bridge. Come here because we don't have anybody. So I ended up going downtown instead. Like I said, it was a different time where, you would have, you're so used now to getting information immediately. It was like we were getting bits and pieces, and, but yeah, I ended up going downtown just because I don't think I would have even got close, especially when the fire was going on.
How long did it take you all to get back to a sense of normalcy in your day-to-day operations, or did you just have just this kind of next man up mentality, put it behind you like a football play and just go forward?
I mean, you did, but it also, a year later, it ended up being, there were a lot of errors made, and everybody can armchair quarterback something and say, oh, this is what I would have done. So obviously it's one of those things, you're taught a certain way, and that's how you approach that fire. But a year later, we were pretty much a cautionary tale for the rest of the fire service of what not to do. So we kind of had to unlearn our tactics. We had tactics that were very effective for, Charleston's an old city, where we saved an awful lot of property going in with what we call a booster line. It's a small diameter hose that you could deploy really quickly. We would go downtown and save structures all the time because we got to it really quickly to the scene of the fire, where that wasn't the right tactic for a different setting. So it was tough because I would say the normalcy never really came back for a lot of guys, which is why we had a ton of turnover. A lot of guys left because we kind of went the opposite, which is, I understand that. We went from being fairly reckless and very aggressive to being unbelievably conservative. And there was no middle ground. So it was a real struggle for the guys that were there, because you learned a whole new way, and now they put you in a totally different mindset. So you asked about normalcy. It never really became normal after that, to be honest with you.
Well, and for those of the listeners who are not familiar with Charleston, South Carolina, obviously downtown is very historic. Buildings can only get so high. They're very restrictive in any sort of changes you can make to any buildings. But out in West Ashley, it's much more of a traditional suburb, and all the growth is different. I mean, everything out there is significantly different than you have in downtown Charleston. The architecture, the layout, there's nothing really that overlaps.
No, not at all. Really, it's very much like Charleston. Most cities have it to some extent. But the Charleston Peninsula, like the infrastructure, you would, not to get into real detailed stuff on firefighting, but you would go hook up to a hydrant in West Ashley and have 100 pounds of pressure. You go downtown, you have 30 pounds of pressure, where you charge 2 lines and you're out of water. So it was like one of those. It was a very, very unique department to be in. From that standpoint.
Well, and around that time, from what I read, you were actually trying to get back into professional football with the All-American Football League. Is that right?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about, I remember that league when it was coming around, but just tell us a little bit about what it was supposed to be and what your involvement and tryout consisted of.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of one of those things that it actually made sense to me, because so long story short of the whole premise of that league was it was going to be kind of tailored to the college football fan. And so, I ended up getting drafted on the team in Arkansas, even though I'm an Arkansas guy. But most of that roster were guys that played at that era for Arkansas or the SEC teams in that area. So, Clayton Sterner was a drafted quarterback. And they're all guys that had pro experience. So, it's you get to the level, I signed as a free agent with the Colts. And you get to that level, and you don't make it. You have a lot of regret. I would have handled myself differently in camp. I would have been more of a jerk, to be honest with you. I would have been much more out for me during camp. It's really kind of hard to explain, because you've never been cut from anything in your life. You get to the NFL as a free agent, your chances, you got a really slim chance of making it. So anybody like me, it's a hard pill to swallow to think that it's over. So when that league came around, it seemed like it had a good concept. They were going to actually pay a pretty decent wage. And when I went to the tryout, I'm like, oh, I'll go check this out. I went to a tryout at the Citrus Bowl, and there were tons of guys that I played against in the ACC that were good players. I'm like, oh, man, this league is going to be no joke. It's going to be pretty damn good. So that's why I got involved with that.
Now, the league unfortunately folded. It never got a product on the field. But
yeah.
you talked about, that didn't pan out. You talked about your time with the Colts, but you had a shoulder injury, didn't you, that impacted your football tryout?
Yeah, I got hurt. Yeah, I got hurt. Honestly, I got hurt in the camp in Indianapolis, and I just kind of foolish how I handled it. I ended up not taking an extra physical. And what's crazy is in hindsight, you hear all these stories. I got hurt in May, I think it was the second or third preseason game, and I could barely lift my arm. They gave me a Toradol shot, like, right after the game. By the next day, I practiced. And I'm like, dang, this thing feels pretty good. Like, and 5 years later, you read about Toradol. It's like it's crazy. It's a masking agent to the point where I was playing with a shoulder that was I was on my last leg with it without really knowing it. So long story short, I got cut by them. I made it through NFL Europe, and to be honest, I almost fudged the physical a little bit by the skin of my teeth. I passed the physical, and then I had to make it the team. Like I used like a thing to kind of mobilize your shoulder all through camp, and it was brutal because we hit a ton during camp. Most I've ever hit in my life was NFL Europe camp, and like grace of God, I made it through. Ended up making the roster, and then it fell apart. First game, I hurt my shoulder again pretty bad, and then it was like there was no coming back from it. I needed to have surgery.
So you had been in the preseason with the Colts. You played in NFL Europe. Did you actually play game time, or was it preseason with NFL Europe?
NFL Europe, no, it was game time. It was the first game of the year. So I ended up making the final, like the roster and going over to Europe. And then I got hurt in the first game, and then that was it. That was the last play I ever played of football. Was dislocating my shoulder on a special teams play, very mundane play, and that was it. And so the whole point was that All-American League was kind of like once I got healthy again, and I was like, man, and I kind of figured out how to train myself. I was faster, I was stronger, and I just had a bad taste in my mouth about football. If I had some control to do something about it, I was like, man, I'm going to try and play again. And that's why I gave it a shot with the All-American League. But that's everybody's story of football. Very seldom does it end on your terms. They pretty much tell you, like, hey, you got to stop playing because either you're no good anymore or you're injured.
Right. So when that ends and you've been trying to get back into football, what's your mindset? What do you do? Where do you go from there?
It was just kind of like, well, it kind of finally got to the point where you're like, well, it's just not in the cards for me. I did everything I could possibly do. And what's crazy is that when that All-American League folded before it got off the ground, you're pissed off for a little while, and then you're like, you know what, maybe it's just not meant to be for me, and it gives you a little bit of peace to be like, I did everything I possibly could do to give football a shot. I didn't hang it up early and then have regrets. So in hindsight, I just moved on with my life after that. In terms of I stayed in the fire department and just put football in the rear view. But like I said, it was a bitter pill, but it was also that gave me a little peace that I did all I could.
So let's go way back in time a little bit. Rumor is your dad was a pretty good football player. Is that true or false?
Yeah, he was okay.
Tell us who your dad.
I don't remember, but
yeah. Tell us who your dad was and a little bit about his career in football.
Yeah, well, so my dad played for Golden Browns. So his big thing was his first year in the league, he blocked on the electric company. He was a right guard, started for the electric company when O.J. Simpson ran for 2,000 yards in 14 games, which to me, that's one of those records. I don't know if that's ever going to be broken. That's pretty amazing. But played in Buffalo he played 7 years in Buffalo. The year I was born, he got traded to Cleveland. He played 5 years there, and then he went back to Buffalo his last year. So I ended up with 13 years in the NFL, and then what's crazy, a lot of people don't even really know about it. When I was 7th, 8th grade, he was a high school coach, and he had a couple restaurants. Long story short, he was the victim of a white-collar crime. He got swindled, lost all his money, and not like he crushed it in the NFL money-wise, but he was comfortable, and he lost all his money, and he played arena ball when he was 41 years old for the Charlotte Rage, which was pretty crazy to see as a 13-year-old kid watching him play it. I think he was 41 or 42, a guy who was one of the best to ever play the game right guard in the NFL, having to kind of swallow his pride, playing the arena league, having to play both ways, play on special teams for $500 a game was pretty amazing to witness. So,
well,
it's crazy when you think of my dad's career. That's the part I remember. I was like, I remember when he played for the Charlotte Rage, and everybody'd be like, "What are you talking about? When did he play for the Rage?" But yeah, pretty crazy.
So he played football. You play football. Was it difficult for you, challenging for you, having any sort of expectations of what you were supposed to do as the son of a Pro Football Hall of Famer?
Not really, because it's kind of, I didn't have the attributes my dad had in terms of size. I was always undersized. Wasn't the fastest guy, definitely wasn't the biggest guy. So it's kind of it's tough if you don't have those certain metrics. If you're not 6'3", 250, playing a certain position. Linebacker, not as much now, but when I was playing, if you were going to the NFL, you should have been. They like you 6'1", 6'2". I was like 5'11". So I never felt like there was any pressure to measure up to something like that. And he never put any pressure on me. So from that standpoint, it was always comfortable. I played because I wanted to play. He never wanted. He honestly didn't let me play till 7th grade. And I was a baseball player. I was probably better at that point at baseball anyway. And he was like, shoot, I don't care. He didn't care if I played football. It was
what
the long and short of it.
What took you into football then?
I just liked it. He was a high school coach, and he was like, hey, if you want to try and play it, let's play. You can play, no problem. 7th grade I started, and I liked it. It was fun. And definitely football, the camaraderie in football is different than other sports, in my opinion. When he ended up coaching at Liberty, I went to a school called EC Glass. You probably heard of it, actually.
Yeah, yep. I'm very familiar with it, yeah.
And at that point, they were a really good program. And once I got into high school and I went to Glass, it was like, holy cow, there'd be 10, 12,000 people at a game routinely. And if you played a big one bigger than that, it was a big deal. It was just an awesome atmosphere. And I made friends for life playing football. That I did in baseball too, but I think it's when there's a lot of physical demands put on somebody in a sport, and you really have to rely on the guy next to you. You form a bond you don't really form in other sports.
So, as we mentioned before we started, I did want to ask you about your dad's time at Liberty. Primarily, because I moved to Roanoke in 2008, which is about an hour south of there.
You didn't go to high school there, though, did you?
No, I'm from South Carolina. I'm from the upstate.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And I went to school. I went to college at Charleston, then went to law school at W&L in Lexington, started working in Roanoke. And when I would first start going up to court hearings and stuff in Liberty or in Lynchburg, it was kind of growing, kind of changing. But over the last 12 plus years, I mean, it has really gone drastically into a very big, very college sprawlish growth, and it's a very, very different place. I'm just curious what it was like when you were there.
I mean, it was like, put it this way, Sam Rutigliano was the head coach at Liberty when my dad went there. So he had coached my dad with the Browns, and he had been, I think he was NFL Coach of the Year one year. So it was kind of like, it seemed like it was the last stop on his coaching career. I remember there was an article, like when my dad got the job there, I'm like, Liberty, where the heck's Liberty? I was, 14 years old. And there was an article in USA Today of Sam Rutigliano and Jerry Falwell going by, I think they said by 2020 or something, we were going to be playing Notre Dame on national television. And you go, yeah, right, give me a break. And then this year you go, dang, they're ranked. They're beating teams. It's pretty amazing that you look back at that. You're like, man, that was not far-fetched. But at the time, it was crazy. Like, you're like, this is ridiculous. This is like, really low-level football. And it really, like you said, I mean, you go there now, it's a different place.
Oh, yeah, and there's always something being built. Every time I drive anywhere near Lynchburg, you can see something being built. Well, enough about the peculiarities of Central Virginia and getting into Southwest Virginia. Why don't we turn to what I think everybody's been waiting for us to talk about and get into how you came to be a Blue Devil, and also it looked like your father came with you and joined the coaching staff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it actually was kind of reversed. So Duke was recruiting me while my dad was at Liberty. I was a junior, and Chris Combs was at Patrick Henry.
Good Roanoke guy. Love it. I love it.
Yeah, Roanoke guy. So I played against Chris, and Chris went to Duke. And they were still actively recruiting me. Long story short, my dad took the job as the O-line coach at Duke my junior year of high school. And when I got down here, I was already actively getting recruited by them, but they offered me pretty quick because I was on campus all the time. And I really thought we were going to be great. This is coming off, 94, they had a great year. 95, they were, I think they were 3-8, but they were losing like nail biters. And then when I knew Combs went there, I was like, man, they're going to be pretty good. It kind of was a no-brainer to me. And if the bonus was me and my dad are real close, his bonus to be able to go where he already was. So that's kind of how I ended up. And then the cherry on top, I've been recruited as a fullback, believe it or not, in most other places like Virginia Tech. I was getting Michigan, Penn State, a lot of schools were recruiting me as a fullback. But then at Duke, they said I was going to play both. I was going to play baseball too, because I was getting recruited other schools for baseball. Clemson and UVA recruited me for baseball. And when Duke was they kind of embraced the idea of me playing both, because Adam Geist was actually there. I don't know if you remember that name, but he played receiver for us and played baseball. When they said I could do both, that was kind of the cherry on top. But it ended up being a moot point. I ended up getting baseball anyway.
So you come to Duke. Who was recruiting you there? Which position coach or?
So it would have been Coach Trott, I guess. Bob Trott would have been my recruiter, but it was a unique situation because I was already on campus all the time. So I was like, by the time I was offered, I was already here talking. I would watch practice and be in the weight room, sometimes just watching everything. So I never even got to that point because I committed really early. I was still, as soon as they offered me in the spring of my junior year, I committed pretty much right away. And then that was it.
And for the listeners out there, Bob Trott was the defensive coordinator then. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. He was DB coach and defensive coordinator now. He's been all over the place since. So I think he was at James Madison, and I can't remember. I might have gone to East Carolina. I can't remember. He has been around the East Coast coaching for sure.
That is the peril of being a football coach. It's never an easy time, and you've got to be ready to get up and move at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
What year did you actually come to Durham?
So I moved to Durham in 95, I think, at the beginning of 96. And then I was a freshman in 97. So I played my junior year of baseball and my senior year at Riverside High School in Durham.
Now, so you were on the last two Goldsmith teams, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, redshirt. So I played my 97. I actually played 2 games on special teams. And then luckily I just kept my red shirt because I wasn't going to play very much. And then the next year I started at linebacker for his last team. Would have been 98.
During those 2 years, Duke went from 2-9 to 4-7, and that 98 squad, looking back on it, as I've done as part of these interviews, that team was very close to getting to 6 wins and getting to a bowl. I think it was about maybe 7 or 8 points away from getting to 6 wins, and then Goldsmith is let go. I just want to ask you kind of what were your thoughts about, at the time, how that season ended and the decision being made for a coaching change, and have those thoughts changed at all over the past 20-plus years?
Oh, they definitely changed it. But at the time, I thought, maybe if we get a coach with a little more of a offensive mindset, like where we could do some more offensive. Yeah, to me, I was like, man, we really had some weapons. You and I were talking about this earlier. I thought going into 99, we were going to be 8-3, and it would be a disappointment to me. I really thought Florida State was the one team on the schedule that, to be honest with you, it would have taken a miracle to beat those guys
right.
at that point.
Right.
But other than that, I was like, man, I thought we were going to be great. And then in hindsight, I said this to you earlier, I think if we had kept Goldsmith, we would have been bowl eligible the next year. It was just, to be honest, I don't think Frank was ready. He was never a coordinator. He was just a position coach at Florida. I think he was over his head when he came to Duke. And, our offense really struggled where even in 99, if you look at the 99 team, we lost a couple overtime games, lost a nail biter to Georgia Tech where we're 3-8, but you win those 3, you're 6-5. So in hindsight, I think it was a mistake to let Goldsmith go, actually.
I've come around to that determination as well, and I also felt that Frank's, and I'm not trying to knock the guy because it's been a long time. There's no point in beating up on him, right? But I think he was certainly the wrong guy at the wrong time for the reason that you just mentioned. He was like 38 years old.
And
he'd never.
Well, I'll be real honest with you. I don't have any problem telling you how I feel about Carl Franks. He was not a good person. He put to me, and other guys probably not going to say this, but I would have no problem saying it. I think he really put the program in a hole from the standpoint of he was not a good character guy, and that eventually you hire a guy like that. Eventually you pay for it, and Duke, in my opinion, paid for it for 10 years. I mean, it took a long time to get back to a guy like Cutcliffe, who you go watch Cutcliffe practice, and it's like those kids are like his grandkids. Like they don't want to disappoint him. Where Franks, it was like he was a very sarcastic guy, beat guys down all the time. Where you're like, man, this guy, it's like he didn't like them. It was really it was very, very strange dynamic. I've never been around a guy like that. And when he came in, you're like, oh boy, you're really trying your best to like the guy, and you're a 20-year-old kid. And then when you grow up to be a man, you go, boy, that guy was not a good guy, like, period. And that's, I know other guys aren't going to say that. It's been a long time, but no reason to sugarcoat it either.
Well, you answered the next question that I was going to ask, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit then and get into the fact that, and you and I talked about this before we started recording, you transfer to Hofstra. Ben Watson leaves to go to Georgia. There were rumors that Chris Douglas, who was a very good running back and got to the NFL, was wanting to leave and maybe thought about going to Georgia too. You mentioned, and I'd forgotten this because, again, I'm a parent now too, and I've, it's hard to remember everything. Yeah. But Richmond Flowers leaves to go to where? Middle Tennessee or something.
Yeah, he went to UT Chattanooga. Sean Johnson went to Delaware and was a draft pick. He was a draftable guy. And he was an all-ACC guy. So to me, if I'm an alumni or I'm a fundraiser, if I'm a contributor to Duke financially at all, I'm going, what's going on here? When you have an all-ACC guy and an 0-11 team transfer down, like you don't see a caliber of that player leaving very often, and it happened over and over and over at Duke.
And Ben Patrick, another one, great tight end.
Yeah, Ben Patrick went to Delaware. Josh Kreider was a starter at Stacey Forest. He went to Delaware. It was not back then. That was pretty rare for guys to do that, but at Duke it wasn't. It happened all the time.
What were the reasons for that? I mean, obviously you can tell us what your reason was, and I'd love to hear that. But what?
Well, mine had to do partly and I'm not trying to throw Frank under the bus here, but so he fired my dad going into my senior year, and they had a rub. It was obvious that it was a situation where one of them had to go. Obviously, Coach Frank isn't going to resign. So my dad can stay there. So he let my dad go, and it was a situation where it was just not a good dynamic going into my senior year. Where to be honest with you, I wouldn't have put it past him to bench me for no reason, just to spite my dad. He's that kind of guy. And when I decided to transfer, I mean, he did some things that so just so you know, like at the lockers at Duke, they have your name up on them, right? Your lockers, your name is on it. But when you're done with Duke, they take your name off of it and they put it in it. So every guy that ever wore 45 at Duke, their name is in my locker. And you go, it's pretty cool because Duke had down years, but you go back to the 30s and the 50s and 60s, they had a great program. So you're part of a good tradition. He took me out of the media guide. Like the next year, I'm looking at it, I go, what the heck's going on? I'm not even in here. Like I was struck from being a captain. I wasn't on any record. My name was out of the locker. And I went to meet him face to face. Say, hey, why are you doing this? Obviously I had a different, situation. And he didn't endorse me leaving, but Frank said first, like, hey, if you got to leave, I understand. As soon as I did, it was like he tried to really do things where I'm like, man, 20 years from now, these are my friends for life. I go back and watch Duke games. I don't want it to be like one part of the program. So my reason for leaving was obviously because my dad got fired. But it wasn't just that. It was that I did not trust Frank to treat me fairly after he fired my dad.
So what was the deal with, if you can talk about it, what was the deal between your father and the O-line coach there and Coach Franks? What was the situation?
To be honest, they didn't. My dad didn't like how sarcastic he was, and my dad is definitely not a guy to mince words. He would get into it with them all the time in front, and it got to the point where they get into a little bit of verbal stuff in front of kids, where it was a bad dynamic. But my dad didn't like him, and Franks didn't like my dad. But my dad didn't like the way Franks treated the kids, is what it came down to. And he would be very vocal about it, and that's just the way it went. And then it kind of got to the point where they weren't recruiting. Franks wouldn't really recruit the kids my dad wanted. Where I'm like, my dad recruited Sean Johnson and Matt Zelensky and Kenny Stanford, who were kids. They used to, like, Franks would always make comments about Kenny Stanford. Kenny ended up being an all-ACC player on a really bad team. So it got to where it just got really ugly. Is the easiest way to put it in a very short sentence. Is it got ugly between Franks and my dad, and they didn't get along at all.
Well, I was going to ask, I think you answered this next question I was going to ask, and you'll see why I'm laughing about it. So let me ask it a different way. It'll be a two-part question. What were the biggest challenges that you felt that the football program experienced under Coach Goldsmith, and then the biggest challenge or challenges that the program experienced under Coach Franks, to the extent you haven't already answered that?
I would say under Goldsmith, it was a little more of, I feel like we had some good personnel that were played out. Like, we didn't utilize all our personnel, would be what I would say with Goldsmith. When I think back, we had Scotty and Richmond were two really good receivers. They're both kind of ACC caliber, all ACC caliber type guys. And then we had one roster. We had Mike Hart, we had Nick Brzezinski, Ben Watson, and Terrence Dupree. We had four great tight ends. But they were never, like, I just feel like we didn't quite be able to utilize all that talent with Goldsmith. And then with Franks, to be honest, I think the morale of the program just went into the toilet really quick. And I think he did a poor job recruiting. And I love that all the guys I played with, of course, I've never, some guys just aren't going to have the talent, but there was a huge, huge drop off in level of talent. There would always be 4 or 5 pretty darn good players in every class, but some of the last 4 or 5 guys that were signed in classes under Franks they weren't ACC caliber players, in my opinion, and they're nice guys. I would never try and belittle anybody, but I think it got to that point where you're not recruiting the type of kid you have to be competitive.
Well, and you hit on this, but those Duke teams, looking back on it, had some talented players. Obviously, Scotty Montgomery, Richmond Flowers, Ben Ertlejack, Ben Watson, Chris Combs, B.J. Hill, some other running backs, Mike Hart, a good collection of tight ends, including Dupree, Stallmeyer, Lenny Friedman, Gannon Shepard. If I didn't say Chris Combs already, he was there. And, of course, Sims Lenhart, probably second only to Ross Martin as far as kicking excellence at Duke. I mean, you guys had some talent. What do you think was the reason that the win-loss record is what it was during that time period?
Man, I just can't. I can't really put my finger on it. We just could never close. We could never quite close we could never put the nail in the coffin. We would be in a tight game in the fourth quarter. I think some of it was depth, where I know the 99 season. I think through 4 games, me and Ryan Stallmeyer, we played every defensive snap.
And you tackled every offensive player on the other team. It felt like, my memory of watching you guys, you were tackling everybody.
Yeah. Well, and we had no depth. It ended up kind of biting us. Like, I remember Combs used to eat like an animal that stay up at like 300 pounds. And when you're playing, you're taking a ton of reps in practice. You're playing the whole game. by the third, fourth game, you're kind of just struggling to stay healthy and be able to be competitive. Like he'd be down to 280, I'd be playing middle linebacker, 250, 220 pounds, and you're like just you get into the third, fourth quarter, you start to get worn down a little bit. So I think that depth was definitely an issue, and honestly, we had a hard time. I'm trying to think back. Really, protecting the quarterback, we never had a lot of continuity at quarterback. Like I always felt like there was somebody different starting every other game.
Yep.
And that makes it difficult too.
We talked about this a little bit. Romine would be hurt. Campbell would be hurt. I mean, it was either a shoulder or an ankle or something. And it never felt like the offense could get in a rhythm. And I do think also that the ACC was really changing at that point in time, and Duke just wasn't keeping up with the changes.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. Yeah.
But you guys, you guys played hard, though. I mean, I watched a lot of those games. I mean, I was a high school student, and I'd watch it with my dad, and I'd listen to him on the radio. Yeah. You guys always, I felt like, played hard. And even that 3-8 team, Frank's first year, I felt like you all played really, really hard, and you didn't quit.
Yeah.
But
no, I thought that team could have been, like I said, that team could have been 6-5, 7-4, just as easy as we were 3-8. Just didn't lose the North. That was a killer. We lost. I remember. It's funny. I remember all these games, but we lost to Northwestern second game of the year in overtime. They were not a good team. Where that was kind of a morale killer. Where you're like, dang, we just lost to a bad team. We played really well defensively, and we lost in overtime. A game that if we played them 10 times, we'd beat them 9. And when you're a Duke, you have to get that win. You can't lose that game. And once we lost that, it was to pick yourself up every week is tough when you lose tough ones like that.
Do you think that in the 99 season, which was your last one at Duke, if instead of trying to take Spurrier's Florida offense and run it without the Florida players, the offense had run maybe more traditional sets, that the season could have gone a little bit differently?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think when you look at the year before, BJ had a great year running the ball. And when I just went over all those tight ends we had, right? I'm like, man, we just have the personnel where you go two tights and Scotty and Richmond on the outside, and I'm like, man, I thought we could present a lot of challenges for teams, and I just felt like we tried to really throw the ball a lot more than we needed to, and it ended up putting a lot of pressure on the defense. I remember the first game the year we played ECU, and it was like a nightmare. It was 3 and out. And I think Frank's first play of his career, this isn't telling, he had a delay of game on his first call where you're like, man, your head coach for the first time. You don't have this scripted since that was you don't know the play you're going to run. First play of the game, first play of your career. We got to delay a game. Where you're like, you look back, you go, oh, boy, was that a bad time.
So,
and,
I started watching that game, and that's how I got in touch with Ben Ertlejack when he put all that stuff on YouTube, and I was able to track him down.
Okay.
And I was watching that, and I know David Garrard was there at ECU, who was a good quarterback then. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking Garrard, but I was watching that game, and I could just see that the offense could not run that system. And I think they called it air raid or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I think that's what it was. And you're just like, we don't have the personnel to protect them. We don't have. We had some speed. Ben was more of a possession type guy, and Scotty and Richmond were more outside guys. But we would run, or practice, we'd run basically four goes and one skinny post. I'm like, man, you got to have Florida's receivers to run this. We don't have Florida's receivers, and we don't have their depth. And it was trying to put a square peg into a round hole a little bit, in my opinion.
Yeah, you guys offensively started playing better when he put Romine back under center and got out of the scramble if nothing's open and throw deep every play. There was some improvement, but by then, I mean, you left, Combs left, Scotty and Flowers left, Watson left. There were a lot of people who were gone. I think maybe that was Lenhart's last year. I can't remember. All the guys who were real talented that had come in under Goldsmith were gone or were leaving. And then you talk about the bag just breaking. It got ugly fast.
Yeah. It went downhill pretty quick.
Well, let's turn away from that and ask about your happiest moment at Duke. Now that we've thoroughly depressed all the listeners, reliving painful memories. Yeah. What was your happiest moment at Duke when you look back on it?
I mean, shoot, all the time just hanging out with guys, all those guys. I mean, I talked to every single one, not every single one, but all my best friends are guys I met there, played ball with. So me and Ben are close, and Mike Hart and Brian Amen. I still talk to Stallmeyer, all of them. And so that, to me, I've met some great guys, and talking to all guys at Duke. That's the one industrial you go and you realize you get more of an element of some kids that are not great kids. They're kind of just. We had a couple thugs at Hofstra, mostly great guys, but we had a couple thugs. I think we didn't have any because you got to be able to, you got to be a different kind of guy to go to Duke. You got to be able to keep up academically and all that. So all the guys I met there are such quality guys that I couldn't name one. There are 100 great memories of that. But in terms of on the field, I'd probably say when we beat Virginia at Virginia, it was Frank's first year. That was a great win because. I played at high school an hour away from there, and that was we were 0-4, I think, or something, and definitely an underdog, and we went in, and they were a pretty decent team. I had Thomas Jones, a couple other good guys, and we beat them there. That was a good memory of something on the field.
Well, we've talked about your pro experience, and we talked about your time as a firefighter. Why don't you tell us what you're doing now and what you've been up to of late?
So now, I've been out of the fire department for 6-7 years, and I do a lot of fitness training now. So I do anything from senior fitness. It's pretty cool. I actually teach a seniors class now that my dad is a student in. He comes and takes a senior fitness class I teach. And then I do a lot of training of just local athletes. But I started working with a group called Tip of the Spear, which I told you a little bit about earlier, and it's pretty refreshing because it's kind of a new approach to teaching contact, and it's teaching kids how to use their hands, how to use their hips, their shoulders, and get the head out of contact. And the guy who started it, I was starting to share with you, his name's Scott Peters. He's the founder of the program. He played for 7 years in the NFL, and the other guy I worked with, Mike Pollock, played for 7 years in the NFL. So it's kind of former guys trying to make the game better. But Scott was hired. He would go do clinics. We do clinics all over the country. He would go do clinics for NFL teams, college teams, and then right down to youth programs. So he got hired by the Cleveland Browns as an assistant O-line coach, and they had a great year. And I attribute a lot of that. Their O-line was the number one rated passing and running line in the league, and they had 3 All-Pros. I don't think that's any coincidence. Scott is an unbelievable teacher, and they had 0 concussions. Everywhere he's gone where they've really adopted the program has seen a huge reduction or 0 concussion because of the way we teach the game. And the other thing that really is great about it is it's not soft. It's not soft football. It's very physical, but there are better ways to teach it that I didn't learn as a kid because the head contact stuff wasn't as big a deal, But now I'm really proud to be involved with them and teaching football the way I think is going to be the wave of the future.
Well, that's great to hear, and I found you through your Hall of Fame Solutions website.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. And I'm asking primarily because my son is a TRX addict. He's 12.
Okay.
He does that religiously every morning.
Okay. We do resistance bands. So me and my dad have a company where high schools and colleges, will buy bands from us. We do a lot of different programs using resistance bands. So we do that, but then we do, I've done a couple of youth camps. COVID has kind of knocked everything down a little bit in terms of the in-person stuff. But we've basically tried to be a fitness resource for people that aren't, I kind of get away from lifting. I ended up having a shoulder replacement. Actually, I've already had my shoulder replaced. I had it replaced before I was 40.
Wow.
And, and I think it was a lot of how I trained. I was a big weightlifter, not necessarily the most mobile guy. It was, where when I look back, I go, boy, I would have really changed the way I trained a little bit. I would have focused more on movement and not on numbers on the weight room board because those usually don't correlate anyway. I was at the peak of my strength, I was probably close to a 500, like a 475, 480 pound bencher. And you go, well, what? That I never remember really pressing someone off me and being like, wow, that's my weight room strength. There's not a lot of crossover.
Yeah,
so
and that,
with the Hall of Fame solutions, we've just gotten much more into movement as opposed to just building muscle.
that surgery too is a big procedure.
Yeah, it was not fun. It was not fun, but I feel pretty good now. So
how
it is what it is.
my dad has a pretty bad knee, and he put off, and he's been able to successfully put off having to have a knee replacement because he was worried about the life expectancy of it. I'm just curious for the shoulder, what kind of time frame are you looking at? Are they going to have to do a revision
it really depends who you ask. Like, you can talk to some people and tell you never do a push-up again. And then you talk to some and go, you know what? Because I still have good muscle strength. I'm still pretty strong and I'm still very active. But I haven't lifted weights in 10 years. And I left this fire department because my shoulder got to a point where I couldn't sleep. I had trouble putting my air pack on. It just got, and I pull a ceiling or something, my shoulder would go out. And, I just had issues with it. So I don't know, like, knock on wood, I think now it feels really, really good. And I think if I'm smart about it, I should have it for the rest of my life. Which I'm trying to be. I'm not, obviously, you don't go out there and do hang cleans or snatches or something with an artificial joint. But I try and still train, and I still strength train, but I'm use bands and stuff. A lot of just trying to be real smart about it.
Well, as we get to the closing part of the interview, there's a couple of things that I'd like to ask you about. It sounds like you're still involved in some extent with the Duke program. Do you have any advice to people out there, athletes, high school kids who are thinking about coming to Duke, transfer students? What would you tell them about going to Duke and being a Blue Devil?
I loved it. I would not, even with, you kind of poke some painful memories there, football. But I wouldn't change a thing. The campus is gorgeous. It's a great education. Like you said, you're going to meet quality guys. All the guys you meet there are good guys. I would, my dad used to always give the advice to, hey, go where you go if you never played football. I would never tell a kid that. I'd say, no. The first thing you got to think about is a football program. Because if you're now we're talking athletes, obviously. Because you go, I always tell my dad, I'm like, boy, that's bad advice. Like, because football is your life. When you go there, it is. It's 40 hours of your time. So if you don't like the football program, it makes it pretty damn hard to love the school. But even though I just said that, I love it. It's a great place. It's really special, and I would never tell a kid it's a mistake to go there at all. And you're going to have your down years in football, but you're also playing against the best in the country. You're going to play the Florida States and the Clemsons, and if you can do that, that's you want to go against the best. You're still going to do that.
Well, I looked when I looked you up. I saw you have a beautiful family, 4 girls. I sympathize with you trying to get to the shower during the day. That's got to be a rough battle for you. But I do want to say you were a hell of a lot of fun to watch at Duke. You and Ryan Stallmeyer were 2 of my favorite players from back in that era. You guys brought it on every single play. And look, the win-loss record may not have been what we as fans would have liked or what you as players would have liked, but you guys really left it all on the field. I don't think you've got anything to hang your head about. Again, you were just one heck of a special player, and I appreciate all you did as a Blue Devil.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. That was bringing me up with Stallmeyer. He's the guy I always looked, he was a little older than me, and loved playing next to him for a couple of years. It was great. So to put me, even my name with his, makes me proud because he was a hell of a player.
He was, and you were, and again, I really appreciate all you did for the program, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. I learned a lot from this, and I hope our listeners will as well. And with that, I would just want to say thank you, Todd, for coming on the program, and thank you, everybody who is listening. If you are a former player, coach, athlete associated with the program, shoot me an email at bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter at Duke Football Coverage, and we look forward to many good interviews in the future.